Hello, welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today I'm comparing and contrasting three of my favorite dudes on the map area control style board games with Avalon, the Riven Veil from Shadowborn Games. We're going to be taking a look at Inish, at Root, and at Blood Rage. Now, I know there's a lot of other high scoring, well-regarded area control board games out there on the market. I mean, we own in our personal collection things like Kemet and Cyclades as well, but I don't know them quite as well as I know these three. And so I wanted to give you all a breakdown, a little comparison between the things that I think stand out in each of these three titles and what stands out in combination with that here in Avalon. I want to talk about things that you like in Root that you'll find in Avalon that you'll enjoy as well, or things that you don't like in Root, or things that you love in Root that might not be here if you're looking for another game to give you that same environment or that same feeling. I want to give you the highs and the lows and help you all make a critical decision, because we are running out of time over on the Kickstarter campaign. They are about to cross $1 million funded, or very, very close to it. I expect to see them cross it before the end of the campaign, which happens in like 16 hours or so. And they have a ton of unlocks already. So exclusive expansions, miniatures, tons of deluxifications and upgrades, an exclusive metal upgrade component set if you're looking for the fanciest, sexiest version of the board game that you can get your hands on ever. And so hopefully this video gives you a little bit more context and contrast. Now, remember, if you don't have the $100 or, more to put into Avalon right now, you could back immediately to get the extra special access, the Pledge Manager access, and go ahead and put $1 into the campaign or something along those lines so that you can back it at a full amount later on. All that being said, that's not the point of this video. Let's talk about and start contrasting Avalon with the other three games that I have here on the table. I'm going to assume that you all watching this have a little bit of context for what Avalon is and what it's doing. I'll give you a quick 30-second breakdown, and then I want to start talking about the highlights in these other games. Avalon is a victory point scoring, dudes on the map, area control style board game where you're going to be conquering or exploring various different areas in Avalon that are hidden and submerged in the mist, revealing creatures that you can, partner with, or I forget the actual term, you can imbue them with whatever your desires are, and they become allies of yours, including relics that you can add to your heroes to give them extra strength or extra buffs when it comes to the actual combat side of the game. You're going to be scoring and controlling regions by having the most people there, along with a battle system that could either be a little bit of a pressure luck system to give you some variability and some luck, not quite dice rolling, but drawing from a deck to try to match a certain number that you have played from your hand, or an alternative system that has no randomness and no chance and no luck to it at all. For those of you that like a clean, I'm going to slaughter my enemies without them feeling like there's anything they could have done about it, system or mode. This game plays 2 to 5 players, with the brand new 5th player expansion happening late in the campaign, and the Fae look fantastic. I only have 4 of the characters here to display, so you should swing over there and take a nice close look at them as well. The main objective of Avalon is to play through 2 or 3 seasons, so the length of the game is also a little bit variable, and score as many victory points as possible. You'll be scoring these victory points from areas that you control on the board, relics and monsters that you're able to acquire that have victory points attached to them, quests that you're aiming at that you're able to achieve and complete, and depending on the player faction that you're using, and if you're playing asymmetric player powers, you'll also score victory points based on a unique system for each character or each narrative that's journeying through this game. There is a lot going on here, and I could say that this is a highly complex game. But to be honest, the base game, the simplified, non-asymmetric, have a catch-up mechanic included version of the game is very accessible and very playable with a ton of scalability in between. One of the reasons why I think it's fair to critique or compare Avalon with so many other area control style titles is not that they exist in the same genre, but specifically because Avalon has so much variability and so much flexibility in how you as a player can approach it and bring it to the table. Meaning that in one version of it, it matches up with Root. For instance, if I'm playing asymmetric factions, I have to take a look at the game that defined that genre. I know Vast came before and a pile of other games thereafter, but most of us have come into this version of this world through a game like Root. If I'm looking at deluxified, beautiful components with big climactic battles and very, very tight card play, I have to take a look at Blood Rage, right? The deluxified CMON game that now is way too expensive to buy third party off Amazon, or not off Amazon, off of eBay, because everything's just hard to get your hands on. And for those of you that are completionists like I am, or at least have been before I had a tiny little baby boy, I mean, it is hard, even if you had the money, to track down all the disparate pieces and components. And if we want to look at something that gives you very interesting reset and grow systems, a way to establish your dwellings across the span of the board, a shuffling, min-maxing, figuring out how you can utilize the card abilities that you have to get just the perfect amount of people in the right position to score you or win you the game, then we have to look at a game like Inish, right? And so depending on how you're playing this, depending on the systems that you have that create balance or create chaos, depending on the systems that you have that create asymmetry and your own personal journey or narrative that you're utilizing versus give you just a platform where everyone has an equal playing field and it's the best person who comes to the table wins, then all these other games match or don't match in varying different ways. The core mechanics of Avalon, the Riven Veil, are going to come down to the asymmetric player powers if you're utilizing them, and specifically a hand of cards that you will be drawing up and using. Now, all of these cards have various different types of abilities. You have cards that allow you to move, play settlements out, recruit, and fight, engage with combat. And all of these cards are filled to the absolute brim full of hundreds of unique pieces of artwork that give you a thematic underlay, lots and lots of story and text that give you the mechanics of each card, and lots of unique abilities, making this a highly variable game when it comes to the type of cards you have in your hand and how and when you utilize them. They're used both as the marketplace for attack power and the marketplace for victory points at the end of a round and the marketplace for paying to use and utilize other abilities, as well as they're used as a way to, do your basic actions across the board. And so you have to be able to look at your hand, understand the components that you have there, and then decide how and when to spend those cards or play those cards or hold on to those cards so you get the most bang for your buck, the most value out of what you've done. It's primarily a hand management style game with an emphasis and a focus on where you're positioned and where you have numbers on the board and what is going to pay off in the long run. Do I conquer this one area that's going to give me access to a relic that I'll be able to equip to one of my heroes that'll hopefully let me win the Holy Grail going into Season 2 and Season 3? Do I bank on the fact that I'm going to get the Green Knight to help me catch up a little bit and I focus more on how I spread myself across the board or how I upgrade some of my asymmetric powers early on in the game? Do I go for early game victory points and a few quick relics and maybe a monster or two that's under my control so that by Season 3, I am playing and conquering and holding down a large component or a large subsect of the board? There's a lot at play here and a ton of cool things as you explore it. So, with that, let's talk about how this matches up with some of other titles. And I think the game that it matches the most closely to is going to have to be Blood Rage. For those of you that have not played Blood Rage, this is a helter-skelter game where you're expanding upon Asgard. I think that's the right term. Forgive me if I don't remember specific names of locations on boards. That is one that I should probably have written down. I never know what I need to remember until I'm in the middle of filming a video, and then I'm like, I should really be more confident with that specific name that I'm utilizing here. Jeffrey gets it. Everyone else is at a loss for words. You're spreading your troops out onto the board. You're conquering and getting more and more upgrades and abilities on your own player map, increasing your strength, increasing your ability to recruit and place people out, increasing your ability to spread and hold these locations. At the end of every phase or end of every round, you're going to be scoring these battles that are happening, and if you win victory, you're going to be taking a ton of victory points home. It's going to be a primarily hand management and drafting style board game. The cards that you have are going to be the abilities that you can utilize, the creatures that you can play. They're going to be tricks that you can take, and they open up a ton of different ways to explore and score in Blood Rage. I think this game is defined by powerful, surprising actions, by monsters on the board that you've taken harborage of, that have now been willed to your desires, and I can't say controlled, but at least directed towards your enemies above yourself. This game is also produced by CMON way back in the day, and it is beautiful, right? Lots of fancy miniatures, lots of great artwork. It's one of those games that really put CMON on the map when they were first coming out and putting out and learning how to use the crowdfunding area, the crowdfunding space, and has been a beloved game since arriving into backers' hands years and years and years ago. Avalon shares a lot of similarities here. It has the powerful, nuanced, specific card abilities, these super-powered moments where you feel like you've really taken control of the game or held on to the right card in order to make the most tactical, careful play. I don't think it's fair to say that Avalon has any type of drafting mechanic, but I do think there's an argument to be had where I could convince you that it did. You see, Blood Rage and Inish both have a beautiful drafting system where you're passing cards around the table and you're keeping the card that is going to be best for you and choosing what to hand off to other players. Avalon doesn't have the part of the game where you're choosing what to hand off to other players. The cards that you draw up are the cards that are going to be sitting in your hand, and I have to be honest, I like drafting so much that that's kind of a letdown for me, right? I like my favorite area control games are the games that give me drafting. Some of my favorite games in the entire genre of board gaming are the games that give me a little bit of drafting. But Avalon has what I'm coining in-hand or single-person drafting. Because the cards that you have, that you draw up, are so wild and varied and powerful, and you can choose what category you're drawing up into, you can kind of direct the type of cards you're going to be bringing into your hand. And then you have to make tactical decisions around how to utilize them. Like I said, Avalon has a lot of different uses for the cards that you have. They could be the resource to pay to play a different card, and sometimes that is a must. You have to spend cards to play other cards. They could be utilized for some of your special character abilities, for basic actions, for power in battle. They could be saved until the very end of a phase, the very end of a season, to give you as many victory points as you can get. There's a lot of reasons to hold on and to spend, to read cards carefully, and to make really, really careful decisions around when and how to utilize them. And in some ways, this feels similar to at least half of that drafting experience. I'm looking at my hand, deciding what I'm passing on, what I'm not going to be utilizing myself and have to use for the sake of playing the game. I'm not giving them to other players, and so I'm not holding anything back. There's no hate drafting or direct interaction with other people when it comes to the cards that I utilize. However, when it comes to what's in my mind, there's a very similar feeling or experience as there is when drafting cards for Inish and for Blood Rage. It's at least half of that process. Again, a very personal, single-player drafting game. Now, the other big things that happen here is at the end of every season, the end of every phase, you're going to be fighting here on the game board. And Blood Rage and Avalon have a lot of similarities when it comes to the way that your boards and your characters develop and the way that you actually resolve combat on the tableau. Like I said, Avalon has two different versions of combat systems that you could utilize. You could utilize the one where you play a card indicating a highest number and then draw cards from the top of a deck to try to achieve that number or get as close as possible to that number. If you bust, you then only get half of the maximum or total value. So if I was drawing to a 9 and I hit a 10, I'd only get, I think, 4. I think it rounds down, but I can't be sure on that. There's also a version where you don't have any randomness or luck to it at all, where you get the straight up number that's on your card. That means that you could play this very similar to how you play Blood Rage, with the abilities and effects of your cards manipulating the board, the troops that you have face up, publicly displayed, and the card value or the card number that you're playing, or however you get to maneuver things when it comes to the actual end resolution of the game. That is the only thing that gets to control or change the actual battle phase. This gives you a very straight up, especially if you're not playing with asymmetric factions, a very straight up, min-max, hold the right card back for the right moment, get your troops as strong as possible, and win victories by the skin of your teeth. There's also a variety of different ways to score, and winning victories while being a primary one sometimes isn't the main focus. For instance, with the Fae, which is the 5th faction that's been introduced, you might actually want to position battles so that they happen and you score second place. So there's a lot of different ways that you approach the battle system, and it's not as obvious as, always coming out on top. Oftentimes it is, but not always. Along with that, the miniatures and the deluxification here already in the prototype is, I would say, above almost anyone else I see producing stuff in this space. I love the dual plastic. I love the color. I love the fact that you can go ahead and get these miniatures washed for a very cheap, very affordable price if you want to have them pre-rendered and pre-painted, ready to actually get to the table very, very quickly. And finally, the last thing that I want to analyze and look at is just going to be the fact that this and everything that this is very closely matched up with everything that Blood Rage was when it came into the space from CMON. Deluxified, upgraded, produced for Kickstarter, and produced very well for Kickstarter. This is the type of board game that if you're a backer, if you like all of the exclusives, all of the extras, the metal deluxified components, and the miniatures that people are scrambling for 5 years from now, looking on eBay and paying way too much for, then Avalon's one of those that you want to get your teeth into early. So to round it all out, I'll grab my notebook because I'm not above actually trying to take notes so I can get everything as accurate as possible. If you're looking for, in Avalon, powerful characters that get extra abilities, that get equipment, that upgrade them, that get monsters that they can join forces with, then this matches with Blood Rage very closely. If you're looking for epic production, right? Just a beautiful game to hit the table, this is probably going to be better produced than Blood Rage was back in its day. And if you're looking for a very similar combat system where you're squabbling to try to gain control and gain victory over a region on a board in order to score as much as possible, then Avalon as well matches with Blood Rage. Along with that, after every season, part of the board resets. So you have this whole ebb and flow, this swell that happens on the table that then sinks back down into a reset and a re-exploration phase for any area that you don't currently have settlements out on the board. Now, one of the ones that I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in is Root. Root, of course, is not necessarily an area control game. While some could argue that it is, you are positioning yourself, controlling regions, and trying your best to follow your faction's hierarchy or your faction's scoring conditions in order to win the game. It's a race-to-win system where hitting 30 victory points closes out the game for everyone. The first to do that is the first to take home the trophy. And I don't think base game Avalon has a lot of stuff to compare over to Root. But asymmetric Avalon, I think, has a ton. And this is where I find Avalon to be such an interesting and compelling game, because the asymmetry here isn't something that's necessary. It's not something that needed to be added to the title for it to be as good as it is, and I think it is a little bit more complex than some people are going to be ready to dive into. I highly recommend playing this base game with your game group quite a number of times before trying out the asymmetry. But for me, the asymmetry adds that extra layer of sweet something that's necessary for this game to have lasting power, staying power on my shelf. I love a game that gives me story, that adds new variables to the experience every time I play, and Avalon gives you the opportunity to do that just in the similar way that Root does. Now, the thing that I love about the asymmetry in Root is that each system has its own set of rules, its own conditions that you have to follow to the best of your ability, given the chaos of the board, in order to score and win. And if you follow your system better than everyone else follows their own personal system, you'll likely come out the victor. Avalon is shockingly similar when it comes to asymmetry. It's not quite as obvious because it is still more of a helter-skelter, straightforward scoring, try to get as many victory points as possible. You can't not follow the rules of the game, but it twists the needle in a very interesting way and is probably more balanced than base Root is, or natural Root is, without players adding their own balancing to the table. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how some of these factions compare to the asymmetry in Root. We have Once and Future King. This is going to be the lovely Guinevere, who's trying to collect and find, I think it's Guinevere, right? Yeah, Guinevere, who's trying to collect and find King Arthur himself, and she is going on her own epic quests. Her game instruction basically dictates that she follows and completes objective quests and takes over different regions of the world that have relics that she's looking for, but she doesn't care about holding or harboring onto one location in particular. So she functions a little bit more like the vagabond, exploring, moving through the board, trampling people in her way, and trying her best to collect resource and collect strength until she becomes overpowered. And King Arthur has joined forces with her, and they just go on a absolute rampage across the land. We have Mordred the Ascended, and Mordred. This is the beautiful undead who are doing their best to kind of conquer the entire board. This is one of these big coin factions, right? Like the Birds, the Eerie, or the Marquis the Cat. They are spreading across the board. They are setting up their own little network of settlements, and they're trying to have influence in every single region, and then surprise or shock with pure numbers, strength, or tactical card play that gives them control when it really, really matters. These are going to be these big, beefy factions. We have another big, beefy faction, which is the Fomordians. Now, the Fomordians, the Balor, are going to be looking at using the ebbing and the ebbing of the tides on the edge of the board to control and direct their play. Very similar to how the Eerie, for instance, have to follow the hierarchy that they have. They have high tide, mid tide, and low tide, and as the game cycles through those phases for this character, they have different abilities and different powers that they can utilize. So timing is key, and knowing when and how to utilize or take advantage of whatever abilities you have coming up is going to be a central portion for how they play. A lot of careful tactical play, a lot of timing your cards correctly, and knowing when and how to use what you've been given. Like the Eerie, sometimes you're given way too much and you can't summon a nest or place a roost or get a person out and everything falls apart. And then finally we have Merlin. Merlin operates a little bit more like chaos across the board, a giant moving settlement, a character that can pop in and pop out of different regions when he's fully built up. The Druids are just terrors, and they're very similar to a faction like the Woodland Alliance or the Corvid Conspiracy. They work by using subterfuge, by you not knowing exactly where they're going to be, or similar to the Lizards, by having an encampment that is so dang strong and powerful, you don't want to deal with them. And then finally, the Fae is the fifth faction that's been released, and the Fae work off of manipulating and actually maneuvering other players' pieces around the board, taking some off, placing some in. Probably a lot of negotiation, a lot of over-the-table conversation happening there. Similar maybe to the Otters, for instance, where you're utilizing other people's pieces to get the effect that you're looking to achieve, or the Corvid and other sort of conspiracy-oriented factions, where you're trying your best to make the board operate the way you want it to operate, which is just dissolve into chaos and benefit you the most when it does so. So the asymmetry in Avalon is a more advanced, possibly more balanced, and maybe less straightforward version of the asymmetry in Root. If you want to play a game that feels like it has a narrative through line, that gives you a journey or a story that you can go on, and really lets you or encourages you to play high into the character that you've been given, Avalon does that when you play on the asymmetric side. It focuses in. Listen, if I'm playing with Guinevere and I don't go hunting for King Arthur and everyone else is playing their faction-specific roles or abilities, then I might have a fun time, but I'm probably not going to be overly competitive. Similar to Root, if I'm playing the, Marquis the Cat and I don't spread my woodland empire and my harvesting empire across the board in the most effective way possible. I think this is lovely, and it also lets players do a similar thing to what you can do in Root. You can screw other people over by knowing how their factions play. Oh, you really want to gain that Holy Grail there in the center? Well, I'm not going to let you, because if you do, I know that's going to be the thing that allows you to flip your character, giving you access to a more powerful unit, letting you run away with the game. It introduces the ability to read the table, to understand the story that's happening, and try your best to interrupt it while you achieve and accomplish your own personal goals. Along with that, there is very careful, very tactical hand card play in this, just like Root. So if you love the cards, the deck of cards you get with Root, where you can get powers and abilities that let you upgrade specific or have specific unlocks, where you're able to get cards that let you maneuver or change actions or create environments on the board that other players aren't expecting. You get the chance to go into a battle and you have a block what's it actually called? I'm blanking on what it's actually called in Root, but you have an ambush card in your hand, and you're able to just screw people over. It has that same nature. Now, Avalon is a heavier game, a more complex game in the core mechanics system, but probably not as complex when it comes to the learning of all the different asymmetric factions that exist here. I think Root is probably more complex when it comes to getting it up and running right off the bat, whereas Avalon has a more complex rule set when you get into the depth and all of the systems that are operating and in play. So, if you're looking for a asymmetric win conditions, asymmetric characters to play through, this will be one that matches up very well. If you're looking for a lot of player interaction for some factions and not necessarily a ton of player interactions for other factions, if you're looking for a game that gives you different experiences for how to approach it and how to play it, this will match up as well. And if you're looking for a game that has thematic and tactical hand and card play, this matches up very good. If you like in Root a race to win system as opposed to straight victory points, then Avalon, of course, is not offering you that. If you like or don't like complex factions, then I think Avalon's factions are probably a little bit more complex than Root's are. Again, I think Root is probably a little bit harder to get up and running initially, but the depth of Avalon and the amount of rules that you have to learn as you get farther and farther into the weeds, great game, but lots and lots to learn and pick up. I don't think if you're buying this, you're going to be playing asymmetric factions right off the bat in the same way that you would be playing them right off the bat if you got Root, because it's the only option that you have. If you're looking for very, very specific, careful hand management as well, this matches up very closely with Root. So an argument to be had, at least a comparison can be made between those two games. And the final one that I have here is going to be Inish. Now, Inish, for those of you that haven't played, is a beautiful hand drafting, card drafting, hand management, ability-taking board game where the objective is to have control, whether it's influence, whether it's power, whether it's control of other people's areas, whether it's control of settlements. You need one core principle of control on the board in order to claim victory and then secure victory at the end of a phase or a round. It is not a victory point scoring game. It's also not necessarily a race to win game. It is definitely a, attack the king of the hill style game where everyone pays attention and close attention to whoever has positioned themselves in the best way possible with the most advantage possible. It's a game that has extremely powerful cards, very, very interesting abilities, and gives you a lot of satisfying card play and a lot of satisfying timing play to figure out exactly how to squeeze out the best result for the set of cards that you've received or that you've chosen for yourself. When it comes to Inish, it doesn't have a draft phase, Avalon, but like I said, the card powers and the internalized sense of drafting certainly is there. Looking at your hand and deciding what you're going to use and what you're not going to use is highly, highly competitive and highly variable and important to the game. I have to make really good decisions around the cards and the card abilities that I've been given so that I can get the most out of this turn, so that I can win as many regions as possible. It has very tight numbers and positioning when it comes to trying to score for each of these regions, and because the game resets and any region that doesn't have a settlement on it reshuffles, different regions with different region powers, meaning relics and monsters and scoring conditions and unlocks when you actually claim them, come out onto the board. Very similar to how Inish has its regions or zones that continue growing as the map evolves. It's not quite a direct one-to-one. I mean, I think this is probably the least connected. If I had to paint a picture between the various systems, with Blood Rage being the most and the asymmetric version of Avalon being fairly tight or fairly close or adjacent to Root. But Inish definitely has its feeling and its fingers in this game. I have to say, though, if what you like in Inish is the smart, careful, tactical play that results in a victory based on your positioning, Avalon is more focused on those large-scale victory point scoring, that big swingy moment. So there's that bit of nuance there when it comes to tactical, careful card play, tactical, careful positioning, but it's for a different outcome. It's for a different objective. It's not quite as clean, not quite as simple, not quite as straightforward as inish is. What did I write down here for the last things on inish? It's got a very, very true area control focus, has a board that resets and recycles, does not have the same victory condition, is not as simple, but gives you very satisfying card play moments and card play abilities, and has a clear leader that starts defining themselves as the game goes on. Now, there are catch-up mechanics and things that can happen, but part of the nature of an area control style game like this is sometimes groups of people decide to focus their attention on another player. That's something that's very similar to what happens in inish, and if you have a runaway leader, the other players at the table will do their best to kneecap them a little bit so they don't get too far ahead or get too close to that very, very tasty scoring condition. So there you have it, a quick breakdown, a rundown of 3 of my favorite Dudes on the Map area-style board games, or area control board games, with a game that a lot of people have been talking and giving very high praise in this market and in this space. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll do my best to answer them throughout the day, so that if you have any other nitpicks or design concepts or ideas, or wondering about a mechanic and how it compares to Avalon in any of these 3 games or other games that you all are familiar with, I'll do my best to respond. Whatever the case, though, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Swing over there and at least get $1 in the Pledge Manager, because I think this is going to be one that a lot of people end up regretting not having gotten. And so if anything, you could buy like 7 copies of them and sell them for like 4 times the profit on eBay in about 2 years. Just throwing it out there. I don't have the money to invest personally, but it's probably not a bad buy, especially the cheap metal upgrades and the wash miniatures they're offering. I don't know. I need to get into that business. If anyone just wants to go in with me and invest, there's a lot of Kickstarters. Think if you went neck deep in Kingdom Death when it first launched with those resins that were available, or if you bought 10 copies of Blood Rage when it first came out. I'd have like 7 poodles by now. I think that's what you do when you make a lot of money. You just buy extra poodles. It's like every extra, $100,000, new poodle. I think so. You get a Chihuahua at $1 million? I don't know. I've never been there. Whatever the case, though, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Get out and play some games. We'll see you next time. Bye.